I definitely think we're seen as kind of like maybe the crazy uncle of climbing.
Looking at ice climbing from the outside, this looks like a crazy thing to me. Like, why are you doing this?
I mean, I think the biggest draw for me is that it like allows me to go places that I would never otherwise get to experience and see. So, I'm a competitive ice climber, so I have been traveling all around the world for that since I was a freshman in high school. So, I'm going on 9 seasons of that now. And I think because it's kind of seen as like an extreme sport, maybe a little bit more dangerous, maybe a little out there, it definitely like attracts a kind of people who are like really go-getters who want to kind of live their life to the fullest and really just experience everything the world has to offer.
Do you feel like ice climbers are different even amongst climbers?
I definitely think we're seen as kind of like maybe the crazy uncle of climbing.
But is it really that extreme?
I think yes and no. I think there's a lot of aspects of the sport that are like pretty low key, and people probably don't see that all the time. I think like where it gets a little sketchier is when you start, um, like obviously pushing the limits like outside, through like mountaineering, alpinism, like different objectives. And so once you get past that kind of like WI5, WI6 grade, you're getting into ice that's either like super overhanging, which is pretty rare, or like super delicate, thin, like smears, or narrow, like fragile pillars. And I think that's where things get a little more exciting.
How popular is it?
It's definitely growing in popularity. I think kind of for a long time, people have been ice climbing, but it's always been this really niche thing of like, mostly crusty old guys going out into the mountains, like climbing Everest, climbing Rainier, that kind of thing. And there hasn't really been as much like obviously the competition stuff is fairly new in the last like 20 to 30 years. Um, and yeah, like crag ice is, I think, kind of becoming like more common that people will just go out for a day. So Ouray Ice Park is a really great place to do that. And so people like are ice farmers out there. That's actually their job. And their job is to like in the middle of the night or the really early morning, like turn on kind of the taps to form the ice. And then kind of out here on the Front Range, we have an ice climbing specific gym. It's called the Ice Coop. And that's one of only like 3 or 4 gyms in the US that has dry tooling, which is like indoor ice climbing in it. Um, but yeah, there's like a huge push to try to get it into the 2030 Olympics. And so I think it's like just going to gain popularity, obviously, up until that happening. And then hopefully, if that happens too, I think it'll kind of explode from there. We'll see.
To kind of go back so we can go forward. How do you ice climb? So you're approaching an ice climb outside. Like, how do you go about doing this?
There's kind of a lot of like considerations that go into it. I mean, it's like entering the backcountry in any way. So you've got to check for avalanche danger, check for weather hazards, anything like that. Um, and then typically they have like a pretty long approach, much to my dismay. So you got to walk a long time. But you finally get there to the ice climb. Obviously, like climbing's very much a sport that you have to do with other people. So it's typically like teams of 2 or 3 will go out to do ice climbs. Um, and when you start climbing, you are using ice screws. So these are screws that kind of vary in length from like, you know, pretty short to like pretty long. And then typically, like people will pitch out these longer ice climbs. That means the route ends up being longer than what your rope is. So when you get to kind of the top of your rope or the top of like the designated pitch, you can like build an anchor with a couple of ice screws, and then you belay your partner up to you, and then you're like together on the ice route, and then they can either switch over and take the lead, or you can go up again.
How do you know that that ice is going to be able to hold you?
Yeah, there's definitely like things that you want to look out for. Like temperature plays a huge role. Like there's kind of like a sweet spot for ice. If it's too like mushy, gushy, like slushy, then it's not going to hold an ice screw very well. But if it's super brittle too, it might fracture and it'll be a little bit harder for the screw to go in. So generally, like around the teens and 20s are like a good temperature for ice. And then a lot of it too is like how it's formed. Um, if that makes sense. Like some ice like does form like really like thin chandeliers, or it's like pretty fragile. And you can tell that pretty quickly from when you're climbing on it. Like you'll swing into it, and it'll like shatter and like sound like glass. Or you'll swing into it and it'll do what's called like dinner plating. So you'll get like a big like dinner plate sized chunk of ice will like peel off and fall down. It's kind of like assessing like a snowpack almost. Like you kind of have different layers, and they're formed differently, like based on temperature and precip. And like oftentimes some layers are really good and some layers are not as good. And so it's a little bit about like being able to read the ice and being able to like um, pick through any ice that's bad to get to the hopefully better stuff that's underneath.
How often would you say that you go up to a climb and then you end up backing off of it because of the ice?
It's pretty common, more common than you'd probably think. Yeah. And I definitely am like a very conservative climber as well. Like I will only climb something if I know that it's well within my ability level. So I'm definitely not like projecting. I'm not the kind of person who's like going to be, you know, really pushing the limits of
Yeah.
alpinism. Like I'm more interested in just romping in the mountains and then pushing my limits in comps.
I'm a numbers person. So if you said like, okay, one out of how many out of 10 times would you say you back off because of the ice quality?
Maybe 3 or 4 out of 10.
That's fairly high. That's more than
Yeah.
I thought that you would say that like,
Yeah.
oh, can you fall? Or like, no, you really can't fall outside.
You really can't fall outside. Both due to like the nature of the ice screws, like they actually hold, I think, better than people think. Like everyone like looks at it and they're like, no, that doesn't really make any sense. But actually they oftentimes will hold. And that's great. But the like real danger that you get into with like falling on ice is because you're wearing like a it's like a boot, almost like a ski boot, so it's pretty firm. And then you have a crampon underneath that as well. And so it's really easy if you fall to like catch the crampon and like break your ankle or break your leg just from like the force of hitting the ice. If you fall, it's really hard to give like a soft catch ice climbing, but it's really easy to yeah injure yourself doing it. And obviously you've got knives in your hands and knives on your feet, and yeah, if you fall, it's generally not the greatest day.
Yeah. So the ice screws though, there's something that they are they more okay, this thing could hold me or this thing will hold me.
Some people place them and it's a little bit more like mental pro than actual pro. Like it's to maybe make your mind feel good. And obviously it's better to at least try and place something, even if you're not 100% sure it's going to hold, or place them like a little more closely together. If you think there's like a chance you could fall, you start to like mitigate that risk however you can.
Is it more physical or is it more technical?
Oh, I love that question. Um, I think it's more technical. So, yeah, I mean, obviously it takes like kind of a base level physical strength. Kind of same as rock climbing. Like there's some degree of like being able to pull yourself up by your arms primarily that you need. But so much of it is just about technique, especially in the competitions. All of the holds are like so precise, that if you don't hit them in like exactly the right way, you'll pop off of them. And so just being able to like read the holds and read the route is like what kind of defines like a mediocre comp climber from like a really great one. And you see it like in ice climbing more than a lot of sports. In competitive ice climbing, you see people who are more experienced shining like far above people who just have like the advantage of being really strong. And it's super awesome. Actually, the winner of all of the World Cups, she swept every single competition, is over 40 now. And she's able to do that because she's just so good. She's been doing it so long. And when she climbs, it looks like she's not even trying. Like obviously she's trying really hard, but her technique is just so good. Um, and she's just such like a smooth and fluid climber that like yeah, that experience like really really shines like far and above like any amount of strength you could have. I really believe that.
Is it so focused on technique that it's the kind of sport where a woman could beat a man, even though men have that strength advantage?
I think it absolutely is. Yeah, that's something that kind of my coach has always like instilled into me and into our whole team. Like when we were um, youth competitors, like there was no division between men and women. Typically, he would have us just all compete, boys and girls together.
So when you go, like when you do a route, is it generally what you think it's going to be as you start going up it, or do you really have to adapt on the fly?
I think it's more about adapting on the fly. So I typically like look and try to identify like any moves that I think will be the most difficult. And I draw those out and try to have like a solid plan for what I'm going to do. And I typically like try to have a solid plan for the first like 2 to 3 bolts. So the first like, you know, 20 to 30 feet, just so I can like get off to a good fast start. Um, but a lot of it is about like adapting on the fly. Like oftentimes you get out there, and once you start climbing, you realize that like maybe a hold isn't exactly what you thought it would be. Maybe it's worse, or maybe it's better. Um, and oftentimes you run into like a hold that can be taken multiple ways too. And that like really I think is also what separates like a good competitor from a great competitor is when they get to a move that they can't do. Like, do they just get kind of hold into like trying the same thing over and over again until they either time out or pump out and fall off? Or do they try to think outside the box?
Can it be the situation that, like, use my hand as an example? Say you hook the tool on the middle finger and you're supposed to hook it on, what's that finger? The index finger? The finger next to the middle finger. Like, if you hook it here, you can do it. But if you hook it here, you can't do it.
Yeah, sometimes it seriously is like 2 millimeters off and it's not going to be any good. Because the pocket is like so small. Or there's just one good spot and that's the only good spot.
What makes you good at it? Like, what would you say this is put all humbleness aside, right? Like, what would you say is the reason that you're good at it?
I think I'm good at it because my mental game is really strong, which wasn't always the case. Like for a long time, I used to get super nervous when I was competing. Like I think there's a lot of kind of fears that stack up. Like obviously there's kind of the underlying like human just fear of like falling. And then like on top of that is like kind of the fear of like not doing well in the competition. So I always like kind of put a lot of pressure on myself to like do really well. And especially if I was like traveling somewhere far away, like nobody wants to, fly to Korea to fall off the third hold. And so, yeah, I used to get really nervous. And then something just kind of like almost clicked for me of like, you're like, why are you doing this? You're doing this for fun. Like, you don't need to be so worked up about this. And I think with ice climbing too, just because it is such an unpredictable sport, like you can hit a hold a millimeter off and fall off because of that. And that happens to everyone. Like that happens to the best in the world. And so I think like my real mindset shift was just going from the thought of like, oh no, what if something like bad happens? What if I hit the hold a millimeter off and I fall because of that? And that's it. Instead of thinking like that, I started thinking like almost the opposite of like, what if that doesn't happen? Like you could do really, really well here. Like you could potentially win this competition if that doesn't happen. So just that little shift of instead of like kind of thinking of the worst that could happen, I started thinking of like the best that could happen.
Are you ready for some harder / listener submitted questions?
Yes.
Best places in the world to ice climb?
I mean, I'm partial to Ouray because I grew up so close to it. But if you are looking to get into ice climbing for the first time, like try it for the first time, seriously, go to Ouray. I think it is the highest concentration of accessible routes, certainly in the United States. So go there. The guides there are awesome. I'm actually one of them, so that's fun. But yeah, go there, get a guide. They'll set you top ropes, and there's absolutely no stakes. Climb a couple pitches, enjoy it, and then walk right back into town for hot chocolate. It's 5 minutes away.
Do people free solo ice cream?
Yeah, it's absolutely a thing.
Is that
Not for me, but
will there be people who are regular climbers, so to speak, and like, oh, I'm not doing ice climbing though.
I mean, there's definitely crossover. I think there's just so few ice climbers even compared to rock climbers that there's not like a ton of crossover.
This one's a little in depth and maybe kind of tricky, but imagine you are at climbing high school. Who's the cool kid at climbing high school? The rock climbers, the trad climbers, the ice climbers? Like, who's the cool kid at climbing high school?
It's probably not the ice climbers. It's probably the boulderers. I feel like they're the cool kids. They've got their, you know, beanies and oversized sweatshirts and I don't know. They're pretty laid back. They're pretty cool. Like nobody really has an issue with them. I think the ice climbers are kind of the weird kids, the ice climbers and the dry toolers.
They're not sitting at like the main cool kid table. Where are you guys
Probably
at?
not.
Oh, where are you guys at? You're not like eating lunch in the bathroom.
No, I think we've got our like little table of just us. We've got our little clique.
Little table of just us. Do you think it can you get down to the cool table? Or is no, ice climbing's always probably going to be its own little thing?
I think ice climbing's always going to be its own little thing, which is part of what I love about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's
Yeah.
just not super mainstream because I think there's just so many people who look at it, even if they understand it completely, and just say, I have no interest in that. I would never want to do that. Like, good for you that you love it, but like, why would I go be cold to like, you know, climb up ice with knives? Like, that just doesn't sound like something that sparks joy for me.
Yeah, that the cold is what gets me. Is it usually really cold?
Yes, I can't lie about that. It is usually really cold. It
What do
helps.
you put on your hand? You're not climbing in bare hands, are you?
No, we climb with little gloves. We actually, most of us use golf gloves, which is kind of strange. But nobody really makes like a glove for competition, like dry tooling. But with the competition stuff, you really need like to be able to like feel the tool and be able to like grip it as best as you can. And so even just having um a thicker glove there like makes it so you have to squeeze the tool harder and then you like pump out. So the golf gloves actually like they're both grippy, and they're super tight. You want them like skin tight to your hands.
Man, I thought it would be like the wide receiver gloves or something like that. I guess I don't go golfing, so what do I know?
Yeah, I don't go golfing either. It's always funny. I walk into the golf store and I'm like, I need a right hand and a left hand, and they're like, you know, you don't, right? And I'm like, for my sport, I do.
With climbing ice, are there different kinds of ice or is ice ice?
There's definitely different kinds of ice. Super variable based on like temperature and precip and how it forms. And I think people sometimes run into trouble because they assume, oh, ice is just ice. You know, I progress through the grades in the same way that I would lead climbing outside. But ice, like, you really need to learn how to read it. And the only way you can do that is by climbing it. And so climbing it on top rope is like the best way to kind of gain that experience before you're ready to start leading. So I think the common rule is like you want to top rope at least 100 pitches of ice before you even start like to consider leading ice. And then from there, like you should really be slow and kind of be climbing ice that you know is like well within your wheelhouse. Just because conditions are so variable, like something can be graded WI3 one year, but then if you hit it, you know, too early season, too late season, like maybe it was a bad precip year, it can look really different from the pictures. So, like with rock climbing, you're like, oh, you know, it's 512. It's always 512. Like maybe if it's a warm day, it's slightly slippery 512, but it's still 512. But with ice, like it genuinely does vary every single year. And so it's really important to like know current conditions more than just like, oh, you know, I've climbed this route before. I climbed it last year. I know what it feels like. Like, no, it can look completely different.
Will it be different hour by hour or generally like, no, it's set up this way this year, it's going to be this way this year and maybe a different way next year?
It definitely does change a little based on the time of day. Like typically you want to like start and finish in the shade if you can, unless it's like a really cold day, because like the sun can start to like melt it and change it, and you don't really want it changing while you're on it. Um, but it typically like once it's in, it's kind of that way for the season, unless like it falls down, or it gets like some drastic temperature like fluctuations and like melts and refreezes, in a weird way. So I wouldn't necessarily say hour by hour, but probably like day by day.
That's pretty much all the questions I got. What's kind of coming up next for you? Where can people find you? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, so actually I have a really exciting season coming up. For the first time ever, I am going out on the whole World Cup circuit. So that's 5 competitions. Starting in January, I'll be starting in Korea, then heading to Saas-Fee, Switzerland, then heading to France, then back home to Longmont, and then over to Edmonton in Canada. And so those are all a week or two apart. And so I'm going to be doing this awesome tour of Asia and Europe and North America, competing, trying to hopefully get on the podium again for the US, at the World Cups. And yeah, my Instagram is the Climber Cat. There are underscores in between the and Climber and Cat. Yeah, I definitely think we're seen as kind of like maybe the crazy uncle of climbing. All of the holds are like so precise, that if you don't hit them in like exactly the right way, you'll pop off of them. People sometimes run into trouble because they assume, oh, ice is just ice. I progress through the grades in the same way that I would lead climbing outside. But ice, like, you really need to learn how to read it. And the only way you can do that is by climbing it.